This week on Engage the Sage.
Hi everyone, I'm Don Saucier. Welcome to this week's episode of Engage the Sage. Today I'm going to talk about some things that you should say early and often to your students in your classes. When I start my classes every semester, I think about how it is that I'm going to set up my learning community, how it is that I'm going to let my students know that their learning and success is important to me, and I think about the things that I'm going to say to make those things clear. One of the things that I try to remember is not to expect my students to know things that I haven't taught them, and not to have my students expect things in my classes that I haven't told them to expect. So I think about explicit things that I can tell my students to let them know that I'm going to support their learning and their success. The things that I'm going to say as models, and these are models, you don't have to say the exact words that I put here, but these words, these statements are set up to let my students know that in my classes, I'm going to try really, really hard to bring peace and empathy. Peace, as I hope you've heard me say many times, is preparation, expertise, authenticity, caring, and engagement. And I think I want to let my students know that this is something they should expect from me in my classes. So these are 10 statements that I make early and often in my classes. And when I say early and often, I mean from the first day, but in lots of days thereafter. First thing I'm going to say is I'm really excited. And when I say I'm really excited, I mean I'm really excited that they're in the class. I'm really excited for today's content. I'm really excited to talk about this study. I'm really excited to read the assignments that I have. And I'm really excited for this time we have together. What this is going to do is it's going to work on trickle-down engagement. This is core to my teaching philosophy, where the engagement of the instructor, me, is going to trickle down to my students and help them engage, and then it's going to help them learn. So I'm going to say this, and I'm going to say this genuinely and authentically many times throughout my semester. And I'm going to reiterate that point. These things that I'm telling you to say today, you have to mean them when you say them, otherwise they're not going to work. The second statement that I'm going to say a lot is I recommend. And when I say I recommend, I'm going to recommend that they attend class. I'm going to recommend that they do the reading. I'm going to recommend that they prepare for exams. I'm going to recommend they do this and that on their assignments. What I'm doing is I'm setting up tips for their success. By setting up recommendations and not requirements and mandates, what I'm doing is I'm empowering my students to make choices to learn and succeed in my class. And I'm setting myself up as a facilitator of their success and someone who cares about their learning. And when you make these recommendations, if they follow them, they're going to do better. And this is a win-win. It's a win for you and a win for your students when they learn and succeed. The third thing that I'm going to say to my students early and often is, how are you doing? When I ask how they are doing, and this might be before class, it might be during class, it might be just kind of in that existential sense, how are you doing? How are you feeling today? But it might also be, are you learning with me successfully? And what this is going to do is it's going to show them that I care about how they are doing. When you do this at the beginning of class or even before class, you can do it kind of as a temperature check to kind of see how your students are doing generally. Are they tired? Are they anxious? Are they excited? But it's also a great way to start building a little connection with your students, to be your own opening act, to warm them up for learning, but also to warm yourself up for teaching. The fourth thing that I'm going to say early and often to my students is, what are your experiences? When I'm asking what their experiences are, I'm telling them, number one, I care about their experiences. I care about what they're going through, but I also care about how they're applying the content that we're learning together to their personal lives. By creating that relevance, ideally deepening their learning, I'm also engaging in active learning where they're actually doing something with the content, but it's also a wonderful learning check for me to see if they're actually applying that learning in an appropriate way. I also find that it is wonderfully engaging for me to hear about their experiences, and I will often use my students' experiences as examples for my future students. The fifth thing that I'm going to say early and often to my students is that it's important to me that you understand. This is an explicit statement that I care about their learning, and it also reminds me, and hopefully reminds them and lets them know, that it's not just about me reading through my slides as fast as I can. It's not just fire hosing them with content. I really want them to receive and work with the information that we're sharing in a way they can use both professionally and personally. The sixth thing that I'm going to say early and often, and also very authentically, is this next content was difficult for me to learn, so I'm going to help you get through it. What I'm doing here is I'm modeling a growth mindset. I'm letting them know that I didn't always know this. I experienced difficulty with this. I overcame that difficulty. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you the tips and tricks that I used to learn this better. And I think letting your students know that you're just not a brilliant robot in front of the class that knew everything at the beginning is a really authentic way to create connection. The seventh thing that I'm going to say early and really often is, what questions do you have? And I'm going to phrase it like that. I'm not just going to ask, do you have questions? Because it's really easy to just not even respond. I'm going to say, what questions do you have, to set the norm that I do expect that you'll have questions. And what I'm going to do is let them know that I value their questions because I value their learning. Questions are scary. I'm scared of questions sometimes too. It's the only thing you can't control in an oral presentation. But I think that is the most important piece to make sure your students have their confusions resolved. The eighth thing that I'm going to say to my students early and often is, if you don't have questions now, please ask me later. And when I mean later, maybe it's at the end of this class, maybe it's the beginning of next class, maybe it's over email, maybe you're going to set up an appointment or come to my student hours. But I understand both, that some students might be hesitant to ask in a large group, and also that sometimes the confusion might not show up until later. So I want my students to know that I care about your learning not only now, but moving forward as well. The ninth thing that I'm going to say early and often to my students is that I believe in you and you deserve to be here. There's some research that shows that students who have succeeded versus those who haven't, the students who have succeeded often recall at least one professor in college telling them that they believed in them and that they deserve to be here. So you don't know what the other professors are saying. How about you be the one that tells them, and mean it authentically, that you believe in them, that they will learn successfully, and that they deserve to be in college. This will be a great way to help combat that imposter phenomenon that a lot of our students have and a lot of us continue to have, that maybe, just maybe, we're in the wrong spot and we're fraudulent in being there. Let them know that at least one person, you, believes in your students and you think they deserve to be there. And the 10th thing that I say early and very, very often to my students is thank you. I think expressions of gratitude are always a good thing. And I'm going to thank my students for taking my class. I'm going to thank my students for coming back to the second class. I'm going to thank my students for making the choice to be there in every individual class. I'm going to thank my students for their questions. I'm going to thank my students for their participation in discussion. I'm going to thank my students for their effort on the assignments. And I'm going to thank them at the end of the day for their attention. I think thanking our students for that opportunity that we have to teach, the opportunity to go into that oasis where nothing else can get us and we are completely invested in learning with our students in that day, that is something that should be explicitly said because I mean it. So there you have 10 things that I say to my students early and often in first class, but all the way throughout the semester, to let them know that I'm going to work really, really hard, bring peace and empathy to my classes, and that I'm going to support their learning and their success. In the comments below, I would love to hear about things that you say to your students early and often in your classes. Thank you for watching this episode of Engage the Sage. Please like, subscribe, sign up for notifications, share us on social media, and we'll see you next time on Engage the Sage.